Well, look what I have here. Why, it's an audience of folks watching Brad Stein Has Issues, where comedy, conservatism, and Christianity collide in a cacophony of clarity. Tonight, we have a very special egghead in the best sense of the word, Michael Behe, who wrote the classic book, Darwin's Black Box, that literally began to launch the intelligent design movement into the mainstream, where all of the evolutionary materialist atheist scientists ran in havoc, just like they were cockroaches, scared to death that perhaps their little meaningless world that they've accepted has meaning. And what could be worse than that? Speaking of meaning, I have a brand new introduction to my son. His name is Wyatt Leroy Stein. He has the same middle name as me. He is my son. He is an adult male. He does have buttons. He has funny buttons as well as just normal volume buttons. And today we're going to introduce him as not just my sidekick, not just as my producer, not just as my director, but also as my choreographer, just in case I should break out into dance. Wyatt, how are you, son?
Well, I mean, your timing is a bit off. You got the two-step and the third act, but you know what? I can't expect too much from someone I've been training for 3 years.
Listen, I wanted to do some Irish dance. Have you ever seen those Irish dance where they're like straight up?
Yeah, and I wish you'd actually practice. Maybe you'd be able to do them by now.
Dag nabbit. Wyatt, well, listen, Michael Behe's on, and the thing about you that nobody understands, but I do, because I know the inner workings of the underbelly of
So you're calling yourself nobody?
Kind of nobody,
You know
but
what? That sounds right.
If I call myself nobody, who is it that's doing the calling? Has to be somebody.
Well, no. If a nobody calls you nobody, then technically, who cares about their opinion?
Well,
because they're nobody.
But
Nobody cares about the opinion of a nobody.
But somebody's watching, and somebody is noticing that nobody said something about nobody.
Yeah, so they know to ignore them.
But they don't. They find them to be fascinating.
Well, then that makes them completely out of line.
Well, nevertheless.
Name one nobody you actually value the opinion of.
I'm going to say nobody.
Exactly.
Dang it!
I think.
Hoisted by my own petard.
I'm not going to lie to you. I am losing the logic here. I am not entirely sure what I'm arguing anymore.
No, you're not arguing at all. And by the way, there was no logic. There never was. So keep that in mind.
Was the reasoning at least?
Michael Behe wrote Darwin's Black Box. It's a 30-year-old book. I read it when it first came out because I'm an older guy than you. Matter of fact, when I read it, if it was 30 years ago, you didn't exist in the atmosphere. I made you come out of nothingness. You were a nobody. And then you were a somebody, thanks to me.
I've heard the story of babies being carried by storks. I have never heard the story of babies being born of the atmosphere. That is a cosmology thing that I didn't learn in astrology.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, if you were going to astrology to learn about babies, then that was probably mistake number one. Probably when you realized you needed to move into dance class where you could actually do something effective. Astrology, by the way, have you ever looked into astrology, Wyatt?
No, why do you ask?
Well, I just thought that if you did, you would find it to be such a humorous pseudo. I was going to say pseudoscience, but it's not. It's not a science. It'd be a metaphysics.
Well, pseudo means false. So pseudoscience means false science.
I know.
So it's totally.
But astrology doesn't.
But
does it pretend to be scientific?
Yeah, of course, it pretends to be science. It pretends to have rules and logic, and it pretends that it can predict things. That's basically the hallmarks of science.
Okay. Well, that being said, and that's a good point. You do need to be able to predict. By the way, Michael Behe, who was the one that coined the term, which I'm sure you've heard, irreducible complexity.
I love that term. I literally didn't we have an hour beforehand? Or we had somebody else on who used that term.
Probably Stephen Meyer.
Stephen Meyer.
Yeah.
The moment I heard that term when I was editing that interview, I immediately looked it up.
Yeah.
Because it was that's such a cool sounding term.
Isn't it?
Listen, why are scientific terms falling into one of two categories? It sounds amazing, and it's the most mundane thing ever, or it is the most mundane sounding thing ever, and it means everything.
Give me an example of that.
It's a good that's a good one.
How about entropy?
Entropy is sort of like a catch-all. It's sort of like it means everything and also nothing.
Yeah.
Because it's something you can slap onto any part of.
No, what I meant was that sounds kind of like I don't know, boring or kind of I guess not a typical term that people are used to using. I was trying to find the switch of what
I would say one would be potential energy.
Okay.
Because it's just like, so it's energy, maybe.
But
like that's what it sounds like. But in reality, it's...
You say it's pretty profound.
It's everywhere. Like, if I have... let's see, if I have this pen up here,
Yeah.
there was loads of potential energy in this pen.
Okay.
You can't see it. You don't really know it's
In
there.
the clicker?
No, in the pen itself.
How about in the little side sleeve that allows you to clip it into your collar?
Oh, yeah, and there too, yeah.
Would that be considered potential energy because it's stiff and thus
well, that's
holds a firmness? Is
think-
firmness energy potentially?
I think that's...
Friction?
No, friction is energy loss due to heat generated by surfaces sliding across each other. Actually, that brings about a good, interesting science lesson.
Carry on.
I'm sorry, audience. I don't. He made me get this. I swear. I had funny things planned for today.
Trust me when I say they've already checked out. They're already going, okay, could have swore there was a podcast here I was tuning in for. Didn't realize I was getting Mr. Science.
I'm so sorry, audience. Okay, this is quick. If you have a ramp and you have a cube and then you have another ramp, same size with like a marble, a circle. The
globe, maybe? Sphere?
Something like that. Assuming that the sphere and the cube are the same mass, which one do you think would go down that ramp faster?
It would have to be the sphere.
No. It would be the cube.
Wait.
Yeah.
No, because the friction on the cube would be like, and the thing's going.
Think that. You want to know the reason why?
I don't believe it.
Okay, so there were two kinds
Copernicus.
There were two. Shut it. There were two kinds of friction: static friction and kinetic friction.
Yeah.
I cannot believe that we are talking about freaking physics.
Wyatt, we're not. You are.
Okay, fine. I can't believe I am talking about physics.
Please explain to me how I got a ramp, I got a cube. Circle.
Okay.
Please.
Listen.
Carry on, Einstein.
Okay, listen. I swear it was actually interesting.
Oh. That will be everybody's own scientific experiment to see if there's any possibility in the entropy that has been created.
Okay, now you're just making...
Because the whole thing is going sideways and becoming diluted and destructive and toxic.
Well, if you just let me finish, it's like a minute-long explanation. Okay.
Explain to me how this is possible.
Static friction and kinetic friction. They are both types of friction.
Yeah.
The difference is static friction is the friction, basically the force of friction acting on a stationary object.
All right.
Kinetic friction is the friction acting on a moving object.
Okay.
Kinetic friction, for whatever reason, is always lower than static friction.
Lower.
Yeah, it's always
Less resistance.
Less friction with kinetic friction.
You're saying that if I was on a train and moving in a ball, it would be going less than if it was on a flat ramp and just let to itself.
No, what I'm saying is if it takes like 50 newtons of force to push a refrigerator, that's how much it takes to overcome friction. Once you get the refrigerator moving, you only need like 30 newtons to keep it moving because you're now dealing with less friction.
I see.
Anyway,
what about if we were using fig newtons?
Fig newtons? Listen, we don't talk about that. That's like advanced physics. I'm only in the basic stuff. Okay. So anyway, back to the point. Really quick, the reason why the cube would move down faster is because the cube is moving, meaning it has to deal with kinetic friction.
Okay.
But a sphere, ironically, always deals with static friction. Doesn't make sense, right?
No.
Well, the reason is if you think about it, there's always exactly one point of contact between a sphere and the ground.
Yeah.
When the sphere rotates, the bottom part that's touching it is technically not moving. It's just moving to another point on the sphere.
Okay.
Which means it's always dealing with static friction because it's never actually moving from the surface. It's just changing where on the sphere. Yeah, it's interesting, right?
Yeah.
Again, I'm so sorry, audience. I don't know what came over me.
It just sounds to me, though, that if you had a box and let it go,
I
that
know,
it would
it's
be
so
like there's so
counterintuitive.
much volume of material sliding again. You'd think that would be slowing it down.
I literally did the physics experiment in school.
So you got the rounded thing, and you let them go, and one of them beats the other one, which goes against the law of gravity, which would say that
it doesn't.
A stone and a bowling ball.
No, it doesn't. Because the law of gravity states that a hammer and a feather would fall at the same speed, assuming nothing else is acting upon them. The reason why the feather on Earth, if you drop a feather, it floats down, isn't because of gravity, it's because of air resistance.
Right.
There's a lot of surface area in a feather by design.
Right.
A hammer doesn't have that, so it just... Bloop.
Okay.
But if you were to go to a place with no gravity, they actually did this test on the moon, if you believe that exists.
Right.
They did the test. A hammer and a feather fell at the same rate.
Wow.
Yeah, because there's no air resistance on the moon, so there was nothing stopping the feather from going slower. Yeah, interesting.
Well, I can promise you when people...
I thought we had a podcast at some point that was actually supposed to be funny.
The people tuned in today to hear about Brad Stein Has Issues.
And they tuned out when they realized it was actually the sidekick who had all the issues.
It was, what's the guy, the scientist, Bill
Nye, the science
Nye,
guy.
the science guy.
Hey, kids, you want to hear about friction?
Hey, Wyatt, would you want to have Bill Nye on?
Maybe, yeah. He's definitely...
Interesting.
Oh, he's out there at least.
Feel the friction, I'll tell you that right now.
I can imagine the friction between you two. Anyway,
well,
sorry about that again.
No, that was interesting, to be honest with you. I'm not saying to them, but to me.
Was it? Because I'm pretty sure if I were to gauge the audience's reaction, it would be something like...
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen.
Sorry, audience.
But here's the good news. Here's the good news. Even though we don't, as of right now, do this live anymore so that my mouth would connect to my vocal cords, we can look periodically at the show in progress, so that would make sure it works properly. And we can comment. So we'll be able to look and see if people are actually going, this has been one of the most fascinating and enlightening podcasts I have ever been on.
Oh, don't humor me. We all know half the audience has ran to Canada to avoid this.
No, and you know who they'd
I'm
stay
sure
with.
they've banned
you
this
know who
podcast
they'd
there
stay
by now.
with. If they all fled to Canada, where would they stay with?
For Spain?
No, that would be Danny Herring.
Danny Herring and her underground bunker of fun.
Lord have mercy,
It's
Wyatt.
been a while, okay?
Anyways. Yes, I do miss Danny.
I know. I miss all the peeps.
I do too. Dang it! And we see you guys. You know what it's like?
I can see you, but I can't feel you. I can't.
It's like being in another, what would it be like? Like another dimension that we're watching it take place, but we can't reach you. It's like if we were in heaven and we died and we look down at all the people trying to go through life and they're all sitting there every Monday going, where's Brad Stein Has Issues? Oh, they died, but yet I keep coming back hoping it was all a dream. And we can't say anything to them like, no, we're up here now. Don't worry about Brad Stein Has Issues. It might sound like a great idea for a Monday night, but it's going to just devolve into a science lesson that I promise you're going to be miserable by the end of it. You're never going to look at a cube the same.
Or a sphere. Like you are going to be so disappointed in every sphere that you meet from now on.
Yeah.
You lost to a cube?
I know.
You weren't supposed to. I can imagine it being like a mob boss, like after a fight. You weren't supposed to throw the fight. What's going on here?
Well, it's like a die battling a marble. Literally.
Yeah, it kind of is.
Yeah.
What kind of fight would they even have?
I don't know, but the odds are on the die. You know, I don't think so.
No,
Just
I
because
do. I really do. I do.
Just because I zinged you and you were left
What zing?
flabbergasted.
What? Where was the zing? I was listening to the whole thing. I appear to have missed the zing.
Why
I am zingless.
do you remember?
It is a pseudo zing.
Do you remember when we were talking about tariffs last week?
Wait, yeah, I forgot. There was a point where we were funny.
Right. Well, that remains to be seen.
Oh yeah, right. All right. It depends how this works out. Yeah, I remember about the tariffs, the tariffs, if you will.
So I've been thinking about that all week, and the reason I've been
sure you have.
thinking about tariffs all week is because, first off, what's more?
Yep, tariffs. Tariffs can't get enough of
What's
that word.
more,
My favorite word, tariffs. Yep.
Wyatt, tariffs are
What's
just,
a tariff? Quick.
Well, a tariff is a tax on imported goods
from
another country in order to make it more expensive for them to send their materials into your country, thus creating them an impetus to perhaps say, how do we make more profit? And if they can make more profit by literally creating a factory in our country, which bypasses this tax, their profit margin is higher. So they have to make sure that whatever the margin of profit is from the tariff or tax placed upon the item as it cuts across the Canadian border, Mexican border, European border, whatever it is, if they say, well, we're only making like it's $1, we make 20 cents with this tariff, but hey, if we started our own company in U.S., we'd make 22 cents. They might do it, but if we made like 40 cents, they're like, you know what? It's more profitable just to start over in the country itself. So
that's a great description of tariffs.
Is it?
Let's do it again. This time I won't have Webster's Dictionary on the teleprompter.
Well, I'll tell you this, though. What I do know, people probably looking at this and saying, you know, I agree with Wyatt. Tariffs is not what I tuned in for. But compared to the
friction is important.
Friction, I will take tariffs all day long. Give me a big bottle of wine and some good brie, and I'll listen to a lecture on tariffs.
I can't hear you complaining of the sphere cube, of the sound of all the applause it's getting. I'm sorry, what was your reaction again? Oh, right, I forgot.
You know, just because you have a button and you use it indiscriminately doesn't mean it fits the moment, especially, and trust me, people watching this, they're gauging whose repartee, whose rhetoric, whose insight, whose wisdom, whose funniness, and yet with poignancy, is more legit. And if you are cricketing me when they think, but he actually had a good point, you actually look like the guy on the wrong side of history. What happens if I
cricket you when you don't?
You are on the wrong side of history.
On the wrong side of history?
Yes.
I'm on the wrong side of the camera, apparently.
Why, I've learned
Make me the host. I can do this. This is easy.
I've learned.
There's nothing about your job that's difficult in the slightest.
Why have I ever said there was anything difficult about my job?
No, that's why you make me do all the hard stuff.
I do make you do the hard stuff because I can't do it well.
Yeah, I have a GoPro as my camera. Why do you get the fancy one?
Because
Where's my union that I can join to get better representation from cameras?
Because I am a GoPro.
You're a pro at going.
Yeah. Listen, I will say this, though. If we're going to be perfectly honest, if we're going to be perfectly, and I am a Christ follower, so I have to be honest. I don't want to, Wyatt. I don't want to be honest all the time. I want to lie. I want to be, equivocating.
Yeah.
I want to be able to sort of, be a little bit maybe not giving all the information. There's times when I don't want to be flat out, here's the truth. But I can't. I'm not allowed.
What if that is our lie? Makes you think.
Yeah, it makes me think I shouldn't have given you those buttons because holy smoke.
Listen.
You're finally getting my money's worth out of the buttons.
Would you rather me not use the buttons then? Just pry them out with a crowbar and say, hey, give it away. 3 buttons, 2 for $5.
No, I'm glad you're finally
using
using
8 buttons,
the buttons.
though.
But to use them against me when I paid for them. And I will say this, to be perfectly honest, folks, when it comes to this podcast, and we do it every Monday, and we have for a couple of years now, and it's growing. It's on Life Audio. If you don't listen to it on Life Audio, you should. And I'll tell you why. Number one, if you don't sit through the whole thing right now, you're going, hey, is Behe coming on? Or are we going in now for a lecture on elasticity or something?
Oh, actually, I can do that.
You can do elasticity?
Yeah, of course. I don't know about elasticity. So it's very similar to the equation for...
Okay. Well, anyways, we'll get to that, I'm sure.
Something kinetic energy. I'm sorry,
We'll
I
give
had
it
to.
Actually, elasticity is potential energy. Just throwing that out.
It's elastic potential energy, but
Well,
you know what? I'm not gonna lie to you.
Yeah.
I was hungry when we started this recording. It turns out talking about advanced physics concepts does not help with that.
What do you mean?
I'm starving now.
Okay.
It's like it's physically draining my my nutritional value. So after this, I'm gonna get some food. But that reminds me of. So mom is trying to make dandelion jelly. I'm not kidding. It's in a cookbook. Who decided? Hey, these flowers look cool. Jam them. But apparently, it's a thing.
All right.
She needed my help with the recipe, though, because she doesn't have enough ingredients for, the full thing. She's making half of it.
Okay.
So she needed my help converting the measurements.
Okay.
So I spent 10 minutes, literally 10 minutes, trying to tell her how many pints are in a cup.
Okay.
In a quart. How many cups are in a pint.
Okay.
How many quarts in a gallon.
Okay.
She could not understand it. So eventually I made a chart.
Yeah.
If you can see that.
Yeah,
I made a
I see it.
chart of all the
Did you hold the
conversions.
chart up for everybody to see?
It's over to my camera.
Okay, there you go.
So, hopefully they can see it. So, this chart right here,
Yeah.
all the measurements. It's really simple. 8 ounces in a cup, 2 cups in a pint, 2 pints in a quart, 4 quarts in a gallon. Simple.
Yeah.
Even with the diagram, she couldn't get it. Took like 5 minutes of explaining. If you have half a quart and those 2 pints in a quart, you have 1 pint.
Right.
She couldn't get that. So I'm just like, it's super annoying. I'm just like, just do that. Just do what I say, okay? Just do what I say. And then it gets to the sugar, where it's 5.5 cups of sugar. And again, up until now, it was like 1 pint. I gotta cut that in half. 1 quart, gotta cut that in half.
Yeah.
Now it's 5.5 cups. I gotta cut that in half. So I'm just like, oh great. She immediately goes, oh, that's 2 3/4. You got that right.
Yeah.
First time, you couldn't figure out what 2 divided by 2 is.
So why was she having problems?
I
with
don't
the-
know. I had a diagram. A diagram. There was pictures and stuff.
Would you have preferred the metric table?
The metric table?
Yeah, over what do we do? What is ours called?
Imperial system.
Imperial system. And then isn't the other one the metric
The
system?
metric system.
Would you have
Not the metric table.
Okay. Metric
I don't think we own a table in metric, but I could be wrong. Most of it probably came from IKEA.
Did you know that if you took a metric table and tilted it and put a cube on it, it would actually slide down faster than if you had bought a ball from IKEA? But that's beside the point. I don't
Well,
even
I mean,
know.
if you don't assemble the sphere correctly, it'll probably be the same thing.
Probably.
Yeah.
I-
Honestly, IKEA is fascinating to me. They have the amazing ability to make even the simplest concepts take 30 minutes, require 6 tools, and make you hate the swish. Because it's like, you made this. You gave this to me.
You love Lego. To me, IKEA is just giant Legos. Which, by
No,
the way,
because
where's Lego from?
Lego is from Finland, I think.
Finland?
Oh, Denmark.
Denmark?
I think it's Denmark.
Where is IKEA from?
Switzerland.
Okay.
Wait,
Aren't they in
wait.
the-
Not Sweden?
Aren't they in the vicinity?
I'm sorry for hating you, Sweden. I didn't know.
Is it
I was a fool.
IKEA is Swedish?
I
Swedish?
think it's Swedish, yeah.
Okay.
Not Switzerland. Swedish.
Swedish, but I was
Switzerland.
thinking that
Switzerland?
Lego was
Yeah.
Swedish.
I think it's Finnish or Danish. I'm gonna look it up.
So, folks, while he's looking up where Legos originate from, I wanted to talk to you today about the idea of picking your expert. Now, this is something that I have discussed before.
It was Denmark.
Okay. And Denmark is its own country, the country
Yes.
of Denmark.
The dens.
And where is, that's Lego.
Yes, that's Lego.
Where is IKEA? Did you look it up?
No, I thought we agreed Switzerland.
Well, why don't you look it up? You said Sweden anyways, but so, yeah, we're very confused at this point. Where is IKEA? Folks, if you know, go ahead and put it in before Wyatt looks it up on the internet because he don't know. Wyatt, where is IKEA?
Sweden.
Sweden. Okay. So IKEA is Swedish and Lego is Denmark. And isn't Denmark and Sweden like,
I think they're fairly close, yeah.
aren't they even border-ish? Don't they
I
border
don't
each
know geography. I barely know astrology.
But you're good at it, I'll tell you that. Even at the superficial level, you have
Yep.
learned all about it.
I know how to look into the sky, see the stars, and go, that tells me I need to win the lottery today.
Well, what I was telling the people when you were off gallivanting around on the internet, I was telling them about the idea of pick your expert. Now, do you know what I mean by that? And you have done so many,
Yeah.
so many of the editing that you probably have heard some of these things that I have said over the years. What do you think I mean by pick your expert?
As in, ignore anyone who claims to be an expert who does not agree with your point.
Well,
Only
and
go after the people who agree with you.
So here's the point I wanted to make, though. I wanted to get your thoughts on this. I don't know how else you can evaluate information, especially if it's information that you're not an expert on. Because the truth is, son, how many people are experts at anything? I mean, experts. How many people are, Major League Baseball players? It is like such a minute amount that it's almost incalculable, the shot that you could ever make it to that. How many people are, I don't know, physicists? How many people are brain surgeons? I mean, people that are at the elite level of a very difficult discipline. It's rare. It's hard. And so I'm not going to know anything about brain surgery. I'm not going to know. I had plaque in my heart. I had to work on my diet and all these different things. But you know where I got that information from? From a cardiologist, a professional heart surgeon who has seen, who knows, thousands of people with hearts. So they've been able to look at all this and say, here's what I've learned works, here's what doesn't work, whatever. So they're doing the best they can based on their ability to observe what they see and try to draw conclusions. And if you get a level of expertise that you are very competent at that, you can be called an expert. But for those of us who are not an expert in those areas, for example, in politics, right? In the political sphere, I'm not an expert. People come to me for my insights and my expertise, but I have none. I'm good at cultural issues. In other words, comparing my faith as Jesus, who was in fact God. He's the only guy that's ever pulled it off to prove he was actually God. I mean, physically, historically proved it. No one else has done that. He's God. It's it. The answer has been had. Jesus was God. And so if you don't believe in that, that's up to you. But people give you information to give you reasons to believe this, and they're strong. And here's the thing, and I brought this up in an interview with somebody that hasn't aired yet, so I'm not going to tell you who it was. But when I tell you, the person that I asked this to is somebody of quite esteem in the Christian evangelical philosophical circles. And when you see who it is, and it won't be, a few weeks from now when it airs, you'll know what I'm talking about, and that I was, in fact, nailed that. I asked him, so there's your first clue. I said, if you give me an argument, and it's compelling, and let me give your thoughts on this way. So you give me an argument about, why we landed on the moon, and then you say, well, I've seen the photos, and I've seen the data, and I've seen the thing, and the this and the that, and I've seen the pictures of the actual astronauts that took their own cameras and took the pictures and showed the thing, and then they came back and they talked about it, and the evidence is just overwhelming. I am convinced we landed on the moon. And then You get a guy come over here and say, well, actually, that photo was faked because if you look at the shadow on the flag, and plus the flag is rippling, well, it can't ripple, there's no atmosphere there, and that ain't right. Notice how the shadows don't match, and plus, when they landed, how did they get that photo? How did they get that? Somebody had to be there. Did they neglect to think, oh, we never would have thought that somebody had to be there filming this thing, so how did they get the guy coming down the ladder if he was the first guy down? How did they do? And so they give you all these other contrivances as to why this didn't happen. And you might look at that and say, that's quite compelling. I think you're right. I think, in fact, we've been lied to. We've been fooled. We never landed on the moon. But the point of the matter is, if you have two people giving you information by which you observe it and you analyze it, you got guy one and guy two. Guy one looks at the evidence for land on the moon. He goes, that is convincing, we land on the moon. Guy two is right next to him, watches that evidence and says, no, that isn't enough to convince me. Guy one is listening to, we didn't land on the moon. Yeah, that's not good enough for me. I don't think that's a good enough. Not guy two. That's all I need to hear. So you have two people looking at the exact same evidence and reaching different conclusions. Now, theoretically, that shouldn't be able to happen if we're all seeking truth, and if truth exists, and if the idea of deductive reasoning comports to reality, if logic is an actual representation of truth and reality, very much like a mathematical equation, like all men are mortal, true statement. What is it? Socrates is a man, Socrates is mortal. That is an actual philosophical mathematical equation that they wanted to figure out a way to find truth in a mathematical way. And the premises are true, thus the conclusion has to be true. So if that is true, we have access to reality. We can analyze ideas and data and information and so forth and so on, and draw a conclusion, and it's true, then its falsehood cannot also be true. That's illogical, which means if I'm given the same information as you, and I see it and guy next to me doesn't, does it mean I'm in error and actually don't see what I think I am? Or is it because I refuse to accept the answer because I don't like what it is? Or is it simply I'm not smart enough, and I mean this literally? Are there people that simply his intelligence is at such a degraded degree that even given information and evidence that does in fact stack up to truth, they can't see it, they can't interpret it properly? And the truth is that has to be true. Like a 3-year-old can't grasp nuclear physics, even though the book is right and it shows everything that happened and it's accurate. They just don't have the mental capacity to grasp it, even though it's true. So I guess it's possible that people either don't have the mental capacity to grasp information and draw accurate conclusions, or they don't want to. It seems to be one of those two answers to those questions. But it made me wonder, what do we do if we're looking to somebody to help give us that information? And I came up with this during the cult of Corona. As I said, we've learned that what we do is we choose our own expert. We find the person that agrees with us, but the good news is they have a doctorate attached to them or some kind of status-driven moniker, and it makes us seem doctoral because we agree with the guy over here. But it's a completely different conclusion than the guy over here. We should take vaccines, we should not. But they have an existential conclusion that is very dangerous, because to be wrong about things like that killed people, destroyed people, gave them injuries and so forth. And that's why we now have RFK coming in here and really looking at vaccines and the destruction that it seems they have caused when it came to autism and so forth. And then you have somebody said, well, the numbers don't really match up. And the other says, they kind of really do. So you have to end up choosing your expert, and you end up choosing the person that fits what you're comfortable with, where you've already landed. And the truth is most people land where they're comfortable because they think it's true. So here we sit, wondering to ourselves, how did we get here? Why are we here as human beings? Because think about it. It is the ultimate oldest question in human history. Why are we here? Is there a purpose to all of this? What's the meaning of life? I mean, the ultimate question. Matter of fact, Monty Python had a movie called The Meaning of Life. And Wyatt watched it. He enjoyed it, but he certainly didn't feel like it stood up to the power of Monty Python's In the Holy Grail and Life of Brian. It simply couldn't stand up to those. But how could they? They might be the two of the funniest movies ever written and created in human history. But that's just my opinion. And I'm an expert when it comes to my opinion, and I agree with me. Nevertheless, we are at a place in our culture in America where the church must rise up, each pastor, and speak God's truth from the pulpit unapologetically. Now, the Bible claims to be the Word of God. Thus, if you believe it is true, and it justifies itself by not only giving us historical information to prove it connected to reality historically, so we know it was real people doing real things, but also that it has moral and ethical components to it that, when inculcated into what we now know as the West, it worked. It created a capitalism where people of any ilk could actually make wealth. That didn't used to, in feudalism, you couldn't do that. Only the monarch could have wealth. You had to work for that guy, and he'd give you a little bit of, throw you a few bones here on the way out. And you were either really poor and subsistence farming, trying to survive, or you were super rich and everybody worked for you. And here comes capitalism, this idea that you can be an entrepreneur, free agent, find a way to make money based on your thoughts and your ideas and your hard work. Your labor equates to value, and that value is how we monetize things. That's all money is. If you didn't know that, money is simply a representation of labor. $5 is $5 worth of somebody working. $20 is $20 worth of somebody working. Why does that matter? Because if you have a barter system and I need some eggs and you need some blankets, but all I have to trade with are horseshoes because I'm a horseshoe maker, then you're saying, I don't want it. It's like, but I need eggs. I'm starving. I said, I'm sorry. Do you have any blankets? I don't make blankets. I make horseshoes. So now I'm dead. You don't even have horses. You only have chickens. What do? You create a currency that represents your labor that is equal to whomever needs whatever they need so that you can trade with each other, irrespective of what the thing is that you are an expert at. So that being said, it matters. And, how does one separate themselves from their own subjective desires and opinions? You kind of can't. You all think, who are watching this, that you want the truth and you stand for the truth and that you're willing and able to immediately abandon your perspective and give it to the truth once the truth reveals itself. And as a Christ follower, you have to do that. Jesus said he was the way, the truth, and the life. He literally represents truth. So you not only have to speak truth at all times, which is Jesus is God and everything that he said about reality is true, but you also have to speak truth to all people at all times, especially when it regards to their eternity, because you're going to die. That's true. Nobody can argue you're going to die. Nobody would argue you're going to die. Matter of fact, what's the meaning of life came from the fact that we all know we're going to die, so we don't know what we were doing here in the first place. So that is why it matters, this ultimate question. And it's fascinating to me because when an atheist answers it by saying there is no ultimate meaning to life, and when we die, we go into eternal, immediate oblivion. We do not know we were here. We have no recollection of it. And whether we were a good guy or a bad guy, irrelevant for me, because I'm not here to worry about what you call me, good or bad. I don't exist. It's as though I was never here from my perspective. So that's what they have to believe. And if they're honest, they'll admit that there really is no meaning. But they spend every moment of their life living life. Life has meaning. It's some way you can function. It's some way that your life can even move forward without absolute despair and hopelessness. So you, what they say, create your own meaning. And that own meaning is a lie. It's a delusion, which they'll admit, to allow me to function in society and get up and not want to kill myself because all of this is meaningless. So when your belief system cannot even function without stealing from an antithetical belief system, theism, God gives us meaning because he gave us purpose and moment, and we are going to meet him one day at death, and then he gets to decide where we get to spend eternity based on whether you accepted his son's sacrifice or not. That has meaning. At least it comports to the fact that we all have this need, this desire for something more, to achieve more, to find peace, to find meaning, to find hope. All of these things that really have no reason to exist in the atmosphere unless we're called to that. C.S. Lewis said it best. If I'm hungry, there's such a thing as food. If I'm thirsty, there's such a thing as water. If I'm tired, there's such a thing as sleep. So if I desire something that nothing on this earth seems to be able to provide, then the only logical conclusion is I was made for another world. And so that is a fascinating, wonderful, beautiful way of looking at the transcendent, something beyond us. And we get there by the objective ability to look at reality and try to draw conclusions. Well, our next guest made lots of waves within the biological community 30 years ago when he wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box, where, as White pointed out, irreducible complexity, that beautiful, sophisticated sounding word that really deals with the fact that you cannot take a machine, take one part away, and just think the machine will function until that part evolves again. The entire machine shuts down and it's gone. It's not there grabbing more pieces to fit in it because it doesn't work anymore. It's not really part of a machine. It's nothing. It's a conglomeration of independent machinery that makes no sense without it being complete. And that's where it came. Now, guys tried to fight against it and said, no, there is an answer to this. He came up with the flagellum, this sort of rotary motor that is part of the biological process and how it has rotary. He literally breaks it down and shows it's a machine. And it's just like, wow, somebody designed this. There was an architect. There was an engineer. And that really, the reason we know it had some super value is because usually intelligent design was ignored by the scientific community. And when he came out with that book, everybody jumped in to say, I gotta refute this. They were scared to death because they realized the inane conclusion to this idea that there is no purpose, no motivation, and yet things will move forward and more complex and more sophisticated, even though we all know in entropy, which White and I discussed earlier, how everything left to itself actually degrades and becomes simplistic. So it goes against everything we believe is true, but if we have to believe in a purpose, we have to believe in God. And for some reason, materialist scientists don't want to believe in God because, my goodness, could there be a more amazing discovery than God? Well, we're going to talk about him. We're going to discover him with an expert and someone who's part of the discovery team that is the Discovery Institute team that Dr. Stephen Meyer, who's been on our program twice and graced me with his intelligence and presence, talk about. There must be something more. There must be a designer. Somebody has monkeyed with the physics. Something is at stake. It's too good. It works too well. There's too much fine tuning in the universe. There must be a tuner, an architect, an engineer, a designer. There must be. And who could that be if they're not part of the material world, but someone who's immaterial and yet exists? Can only be God. Folks, that's what we're going to talk about today, with a man that you should see his books, read his books as a Christ follower to get even deeper in understanding what it means to prove that God's handiwork reveals he's out there. So please, please enjoy the privilege that we have of speaking tonight. And we'll listen to it on Life Audio later if you can't listen today. And please share this and subscribe to my YouTube channel, Brett's on His Issues, so you can see the kind of guests that we're getting on, and they're getting even more and more amazing every time I turn around. Blows my mind. This will blow your mind tonight. Please welcome Michael Behe. How do you do,
Hi,
sir?
great to be with you. Yeah, Mike is good. You can call me that.
Oh,
Unless you want to impress people, then you can call me professor, I guess.
yes. Well, listen, if I was a professor, I would demand that people call me that on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But listen, I appreciate you taking some time. I know you are a very busy man, and you are teaching as well as, I'm sure, lecturing and doing things like this. So I don't want to get for granted your time. I'm sure it's quite valuable. But um, as you heard in my opening statement, I've had a colleague of yours, Stephen Meyer, on a few times, and I just really admire guys like you because I believe that the intellectual realm of Christianity has been so neglected in the American church for so long. And I don't know, um, maybe that's not the duty of the church is necessarily to take that tack, but by the same token, I think that we have a lot of people who believe that intellectual depth and faith is diverge. And I don't think that's the case, obviously, and people like you have proven that. So um, I don't know, perhaps just for a moment, give me a little bit of your thoughts on just why you feel like your faith has in fact, been a I guess a leading edge into how you see the world and how it's affected your science and just your whole worldview in general.
Well, let me first comment on saying that I think the church really has to be involved in intellectual issues, or else we're at the mercy of folks who say, "Well, this is the way the world works," or "This is the way you should behave." And if we don't have any folks who can step up and articulate Christianity to at the highest levels, then we're not really doing our job. Of course, it's not for everybody. The body has many members and
Mm.
so on, but it's for somebody. So
Yeah.
folks have to do it. And but let me second say that, well, I'm really pleased that you would admire me and Steve, but you're you should probably save it for folks who are doing something more difficult, because it turns out that the more and more science knows, the more and more design and God's design, God's work in the world becomes truly apparent. You have to kind of you have to work to ignore it. The more you know. As for my faith, I'm a Roman Catholic, and I was born into a Catholic family and went to parochial schools, and am a practicing Catholic. My wife and I have 9 kids, so we're we believe it
You
all.
you put your money where your mouth is.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, the Catholic Church has never made too much of an issue about evolution. Uh, we were always taught in Catholic schools that, well, God made the world and he made the laws of the world, and he can make life any way he wants to. It's not, who are we to tell him otherwise? And if he wanted to make it by the outplaying of natural processes, well, okay. And so I was actually taught about Darwin's theory in parochial schools and in biology and in high school and so on. And it didn't bother me. I never had a problem with it. I let other people worry about it. It was only when I, studied science, and I'm a biochemist, which studies the molecular basis of life. And I was told all along that science has the answers. And when you study biochemistry, you study really, really sophisticated and complex machinery that runs the cell. And oftentimes when I studied, I would read my textbook and say, "Wow, I wonder how that could have evolved." And
Mm.
but then I turn the page and say, "Well, somebody must have figured it out." And I go on and think about something else. And so my faith actually didn't really affect my belief in intelligent design. I certainly thought God was the creator, but I didn't think special action was needed to explain life. It
Mm.
was only later on, when I was actually an associate professor already in the mid 1980s, which tells you how old I am, I guess, that I read a book called Evolution, a Theory in Crisis by a medical doctor and geneticist named Michael Denton. And he, at the time, was an agnostic. He didn't really have a strong philosophical iron in the fire here, but he was sick and tired of hearing Darwinists claim so much for their theory when he saw lots and lots of problems with it. And reading his book, where he pointed out problems I had never heard about in my education. Here I was a professor, and I was supposed to know about this stuff and didn't. It wasn't until then that I was startled into an interest in the topic. So I approached the topic of design. I am a Christian. Like to think of myself as a devoted Christian, not necessarily a good one, uh, but it's mostly science that drives all my objections to this. And
Yeah.
I agree with Steve Meyer on almost everything, but I'm a biochemist, so I stick pretty closely to the molecular foundation of life.
You know, I'm not a Catholic, but I've had a lot of admiration for Catholics over the years because they have such a history of intellectual acumen. You have your Aquinas and Augustine and Chesterton, and I mean, I'm sure many more guys you would know that I wouldn't be aware of. But I feel like one thing I have observed is this sort of caricature of Christianity and science that is just so absurd. I got to be honest with you. For a long time, my whole approach is, and you're told as a Christian, be whimsical and be sweet and be kind and God bless you. Most of the people I see, like Stephen and even yourself and me, you guys have that kind of temperament. John Lennox, I mean, he's ridiculous. I mean, it's like, how do you be that nice? Because I got to tell you something. I get very frustrated with atheism in that it seems like I think we give them too much of a pass in what we allow them presuppositionally to even begin their arguments with that they can't justify from their worldview. And I start wondering to myself, does there come a point where some righteous indignation needs to be brought to the fore? Because they will create this illusion that Christianity tried to thwart science, and the Dark Ages was a result of Christians trying to put a damper on science, or Galileo and this and that. And from what I understand, you could probably clear this up, but it wasn't that the church had a problem with him postulating his theory. It was that the science at that time was more geocentric, so they just felt like he was going against the science of the times, and that everybody had kind of agreed to, so they saw it as more of a maverick in that regard. It wasn't because they cared that the guy was postulating a new idea. Anyways, give me a little background on how do you think we've been mischaracterized as a Catholic in the realm of science over the years, because we kind of started this whole, at least the modern science as we know it, we've started the method.
Yeah, that's what I read too. I'm no historian, but from what I read, the church, has been a great patron of science throughout the ages, and again, what I read is that Christianity, who thought that the universe is a law, is set up to be governed by laws given by God, was confident enough to investigate nature, seeing that there will be answers to questions, whereas other religious traditions didn't expect necessarily a law-governed universe. So yes, and again, from what I read, not a historian, but it turns out that proponents of scientism, especially in the 19th century. There were a couple of folks, I think one's name was Andrew Dixon White, a former president of Cornell, propounded something he called the warfare thesis, that religion and science are mortal enemies, and no historian of any worth accepts that, and they realize that his arguments are poor ones, but somehow this got soaked into the culture, and not just in academia, but in the media and entertainment industry and so on. And yeah, it's a real problem. But so in too many cases, Christians are caricatured as not as behind the times. But at least in science, I've come to the conclusion that you know many opponents have to ridicule Christians because that's all they have. The sociological pressures to get everybody to agree with you and say we're the cool kids and
Yeah.
you're not.
Yeah.
But if you look at this, if you look at the science, as I've said a few minutes ago, the more and more that we know about nature, the more and more it points strongly beyond itself to an intelligent being who set it up. Yeah, most people forget back in Darwin's day that science thought the cell was a little piece of jelly that they called protoplasm, and that it was so simple that maybe it could just pop up from sea mud. A couple of friends of Darwin, a guy named um, Thomas Huxley and another fellow, Ernst Haeckel, actually proposed that a piece of mud that they found from that an exploring ship dredged up was actually incipient life.
Hmm.
Um, and the history of science since then is that the more and more we look, the more and more complexity and elegance and so on is discovered. So in a sense, it's not good that Christians are ridiculed, but I'd rather be ridiculed and right than admired and wrong.
Well, and I think I could be wrong, but it wasn't Haeckel the one that made the little drawings of embryos of all these different to show how similar the fish looks similar to the thing, which looks like the elephant, which looks like the human, and it was a fraud. The whole
That's
thing was like
correct. Yeah.
fraudulent. It's like, wait a minute, if you have to fake things, I don't
Yeah.
understand. Well, but I think what I do understand, and I came across this quote, and I'm going to read it because I think it'll be a great way to establish kind of what we're talking about. And this is from your friend and mine, Richard Dawkins. But I found this to be quite telling, and I think it's important to establish what you and I are talking about here this evening. He said this: if I were to give an award for the single best idea anyone has ever had, I'd give it to Darwin, ahead of Newton and Einstein and everyone else. In a single stroke, the idea of evolution by natural selection unifies, now listen to this leap, the realm of life, meaning, and purpose with the realm of space and time, cause and effect, mechanism, and physical law. Holy yeah, well, if that's true, Darwin was the greatest freaking thinker in human history because, okay, so this is where you will have to talk me down from the ledge, sir. The leaps that these atheists take, and listen, God bless him. He's a smart guy. Obviously, he's a smart man. He's trying to figure out the way the things work. I give him, I guess, I'll give him a pass that he's doing the best he can to see the world the way he sees it. He certainly has a right to observe what he sees and draw conclusions. But when you start moving into especially teleology, when you start giving meaning to meaninglessness, that's a religion. You've moved into metaphysics. You have way gone beyond the boundaries of your natural science. So I guess what I hope that I find some interesting conversation with you, because I know you've done this a million times, and I don't want to try to re-ask the same questions you've gotten, but I'm hoping to find a little bit different angle. I'm wondering about I think what you discovered with irreducible complexity, that I think you coined that term, this whole idea that life, if it's that the way we observe it as scientists, the way we observe it as people, that there is a meaning to here, there's an end game to all of this, simply cannot be a result of random mutations, of an accident, of a meaninglessness. It simply can't occur. At least everything we know logically as humans, the way we observe things, if there's a code to it, it's trying to get somewhere with volition. And that seems to be exactly what naturalism and Darwinism doesn't do just by its very nature.
Mm-hmm.
It just accidentally stumbles upon things that happen to allow it to continue, but there's no rhyme or reason to it. So how do they make these leaps into as though there's a mind behind this without one? I'm probably confusing my words here, but I'm just so confounded by how they reach conclusions that don't seem to follow the logic they say they believe in.
Well, it's because it's kind of wish fulfillment and unrestricted imagination. The quote that you read a minute or so ago, I think that's actually from Daniel Dennett.
Oh, okay.
If I'm not mistaken. Yeah, Daniel Dennett was a big old Darwinist too, just like Richard Dawkins. He died a year or two ago, I think, maybe a couple years. And he was one of the new atheists, the four horsemen, whatever they called themselves. And he wrote that book, a book he called Darwinism, a Universal Acid. And it's interesting. I didn't debate him but I was once, but I was on a stage where we both gave talks and so on, and he thanked me for writing Darwin's Black Box because he didn't know anything about biochemistry, he said, and he learned a lot from it, which is really actually revealing because biochemistry is the foundation of life.
Right.
And that means that Dennett was making his conclusions about how much Darwinism could explain without even knowing how life worked.
Yes.
And in fact, Darwin did the same thing. He says, well, here's an idea, and okay, it was a good idea at the time. Maybe it'll work, maybe it won't, maybe it'll work in certain circumstances, not in others. But Darwin didn't know anything about cells. In the 19th century, nobody knew that there were such things as molecules. They were kind of theoretical. Nobody was sure if they actually existed or not. And as I've said before, but especially since Watson and Crick in the early 1950s and work since then, it turns out that biology not isn't the simple little glob of protoplasm. The cell isn't that they were thinking, but rather it's filled with machines. I mean, literally machines made out of molecules. There are little molecular trucks and buses that go through your cells all the time to make it work. There are outboard motors that make it work. There's Steve Meyer always talks about the genetic code, and there's information in your cells. And what these guys have done since especially since the 30s and 40s, when something called the neo-Darwinian synthesis was put together, is simply run on intellectual inertia. They figure, well, we've got the answer. We'll just fit everything into it, and whether it fits very well or not, forget it. Neo-Darwinism, which is pretty much what is currently the evolutionary theory, was finalized in the 1940s, which is before Watson and Crick knew about the structure of DNA, before the genetic code was discovered, before molecular machinery was discovered. And it's been assumed, and it's been passed down from professor to graduate student, from them to the next generation, and so on, that we know this. Well, we don't know the particulars if you press them on it, but we'll figure it out. We've got a general answer in hand. And that's what Daniel Dennett was talking about. He hasn't the foggiest idea how, say, the blood clotting system could have evolved, how molecular machines could have evolved, how a code could have evolved. He just assumes it did somehow.
Mm.
Um, uh, so now I'm the one getting excited here.
Well,
So
but we
the,
should, because again, and maybe, I don't know, maybe, I mean, I'm a comedian, so I'm used to sort of free speech and having access to whatever I need to communicate to make a point. It's a beautiful thing about comedy, is it allows us to really go areas that isn't necessarily what you would see in civil society, because it's given a special place in society. It's a different category. You're given permission to make fun of the king and not get your head cut off. You're given a special place in this cultural milieu. And yet we need guys like you. But here's something that I guess I want to try to, I hope, sort of find with you, that maybe just will help answer questions of people that are watching me, and enjoy what I do, bringing on wonderful guests like you who are experts in your field. And this is, I guess, something that I want to experiment with you a little bit, if you could help me. Okay, so in this last few years, I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but a couple of years ago, the most dangerous virus in human history popped into the scene. It was killing people left and right, but thank God, if you wore a mask, you were fine. Anyways, this Black Plague persona, I mean, nothing was more horrific than this corona. It was so bad that only 99.8% of the people that got it survived. So, I mean, we're talking about a catastrophe. Now, obviously, I'm being sarcastic about the corona, but it makes a bigger point. What we learned at that time was beyond, forget that game that was played against us to begin to control the narrative and the culture. But what was so telling was that scientists were forbidden to speak if they disagreed. Scientists were told, you don't have access to the table of ideas here. I'm talking about biologists. I'm talking about people who, that's my ballywick. That's what I know exactly how this works. I can't even talk. No. So clearly, there's a political realm to science. There's a narrative that's being controlled by somebody. It ain't us, or at least me, your average citizen. And the other thing I've learned is, for somebody that's a layman, who's not a biochemist like yourself, who has a very specialized educational commitment to an idea that is going to be much more sophisticated than your average person, how in the heck is a guy like me going to even know what you're telling me is accurate, is true? How do I weigh it with other ideas? How do I compare? What I have learned is we just choose our expert and we just accept their premise. So how do we even begin as a layman to know? Because there's people telling, like, for example, your irreducible complexity, which seems to me to be logically obvious. You can't just have a machine take a part out, but the machine is still functioning without the part until eventually the part, it doesn't make sense logically. But I'm sure there are guys with a degree like you who have said, we've solved this irreducible complexity. This guy's full of crap. So there was a lot of a lot of rhetoric there in this question. But I guess my question to you is, how do we begin to even discover objective observation of an idea when you have two divergent
right.
conclusions?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and it's a big problem. I mean, because if there are folks with specialized knowledge, somebody without that is going to be restricted in what they can say. And if the person with the specialized knowledge has an agenda that you don't share and he's not making clear, then you could be led down a path based on an assumption rather than, science is given such respect in our society because it's supposed to do experiments. It's supposed to challenge stuff and look for the real evidence behind stuff. But as your quotation of Daniel Dennett just a minute or two ago showed, he makes amazing jumps in logic and he doesn't even know what he's talking about. And yet he's stamped as a premier philosopher. And what's somebody, what's somebody without a specialized education to do?
Yeah.
Well, the short answer is yeah, it makes it difficult. But I guess a longer answer is that I think in these days of the internet and much more easy communication, it brings a lot of problems. But one thing it does bring is to to take down specialties a peg or two. We've seen, over the coronavirus during the pandemic and stuff, if you're paying attention, you did see the things that you alluded to that, excuse me, dissenting voices were suppressed and that a scenario was insisted upon even before all the evidence was in, and people were shunned because they asked questions. And I think people then got to see how the scientific sausage was made, especially with issues that, had either political or ideological importance to groups of people. And I think at the very least, more people these days are on alert that they will have, if an issue is important to them, then yeah, they're going to have to look around more. They can't just trust the director of the NIH to tell them, what is what. They can't just rely on, say, a philosophy professor like Daniel Dennett to tell them, whether there's purpose in the world or not. And thankfully, Steve Meyer and I are associated with the Discovery Institute. That's just one of many institutions that are dedicated to challenging a lot of the scenarios that are put out there, and in general, to make materials available to people to explain in terms that the layman can understand what the issues are. And in most cases, they aren't hard to see. I mean, I talk about cells and stuff, but the basic issue is that Darwin's theory, the Darwinian mechanism, doesn't have a mind, and we're being asked to believe that it could construct something like an eyeball, which is sophisticated beyond description.
Yeah.
And when you ask, people wave their hands and say, "Why, look, here's a simpler eyeball. Here's another more sophisticated, and here we are." And they assert that that proves it. Well, it does not. But I think the simple problem is how does a mindless process put things together? And it turns out that Darwin's theory does not address that.
Yeah.
I maybe I'm going off on a tangent, but in my book, Darwin's Black Box, that you mentioned early, which was been out almost 30 years now, I used as an example of irreducible complexity and intelligent design a mousetrap, a simple mechanical mousetrap. It needs a number of pieces, a spring, a bar that called the hammer, which squashes a mouse, a wooden platform and stuff, to make the point that there are structures that can't be made gradually, like Darwin's theory requires. It requires that something change a little bit, and that helps a little bit, and then changes a little bit more, that helps a little bit more, and so on. But things that are irreducibly complex, like a crummy old mousetrap, resist this mechanism. And it turns out that any machine will be irreducibly complex, or at least large components of it, because machines work by having different parts interacting with each other to do stuff. Cars, vacuum cleaners, pretty much anything. And so, and again, we've found out that life is run by machines. Cells are based on machines, and nobody has explained this. So it is a big problem for, how is a layman supposed to know this for himself? But if you just read material, if you read more widely, if you see that there's an important issue, like where did we come from? Were we designed, or are we happenstance? That's a big fundamental issue for everybody. So you might want to spend a bit of time just looking into the issues. And fortunately, it's getting easier these days to put out materials like Discovery Institute does. And if you look around enough, even if you finally decide that, you're going to come down on this side of the issue, you should read, multiple different points of view. Heretics, people who aren't heretics, but think the consensus is, a smidgen off, maybe just a smidgen. Read a wide range of views, and that will inoculate you, I think, against grand claims like Daniel Dennett made, you read a minute ago.
I think that, one of the problems being human is it's very difficult to be introspective and really see yourself objectively. For example, it's easy to look at someone who you feel as though is missing the idea of a mind, of an intelligence, for example, like we're talking about, and you say, well, they're suffering from cognitive dissonance. They're uncomfortable that their worldview is being disrupted, so it's difficult for them to see that. And it's easy for me to proclaim that, and I may be right, but by the same token, I do the same thing. I think that we lose, language is so crucial, and it's also a perfect fit for what we're discussing, because whoever controls the language controls the people, the culture, frankly. So I remember speaking, for example, once about the idea of bigotry. It's like, oh, you're a bigot. I said, well, what does bigot mean? A bigot simply means, an absolute intolerance to a dissenting view, or a view that, you disagree with, or have an abhorrence towards. And I said, but here's the thing. I'm a bigot towards Nazis, let's say. Let's just use that term, since that's thrown around all the time. It's like, yeah, I have no tolerance for a Nazi. Okay, none. I'm a bigot towards a Nazi, which is a good thing. So just because the word is used doesn't necessarily mean it's negative. It can be used in a powerful way. And I say that because you used the word agenda earlier. Because wouldn't you agree? An agenda is simply a fancy word for seeking reality. I'm trying to be consistent with what I think comports to truth. That's what I'm trying to do. Now, what I never understood by scientists, and you are one, but you have an agenda. You believe God is in the mix, so you're trying to simply expose his handiwork through observation, which is all science does. Science is just descriptive. Who, what, when, where, and how. It doesn't get to why. Why is metaphysical. That's for the philosophers and the theologians. But the Darwinists try to move into that space and give it meaning, which it literally, to be true Darwinism, it is meaningless. It accidentally stumbled upon cognitive beings. So again, I know I'm all over the map here, but I just want to take advantage of speaking to you about this particular world, because so many of us don't understand that the materialist has an agenda to give sophistication and meaning and truth without an ultimate being. That's their agenda. They are determined. And I didn't mean that unintended, though Sam Harris is, I guess. But they're determined to prove God. And yet, if they're accurate, that we're a closed system, then they're not really giving us truth or information at all. They were simply predisposed to espouse these ideas that are coming out of their head. I'm predisposed to disagree with them because I don't agree with them. We're both determined. We're stuck in this loop. It's like a movie's already been created in our head. We can't change it. It always ends the same because it's a pre-recorded film. So there's nothing to learn here. I don't know why they continue to try to prove meaninglessness and then say, now that we've known that life has no meaning, let's find meaning in that. So again, sir, I don't know that this is exactly what you're used to the discussion, but I feel like
No, this is
because
new.
because your strength is this idea of mind, which I think is the lost foundation that should be utilized more against the naturalists, is you can't account for
Right.
mind. You can't account for this thing. It's impossible. So do you see that the agenda of this materialism has actually done the opposite of what they say, which is hindered maybe the greatest scientific discovery of all time, which would be God?
Well, yeah. Well, first, let me kind of back up and say, yeah, agenda is a loaded word. It's used in certain contexts. An agenda can be, a simple thing if you have a list of tasks to do when you're in your meeting, but we oftentimes say that our opponents have agendas, and but we have goals and okay, yeah, that's certainly true. But when I used it in respect to the materialists, Darwinists, and so on, I guess that what I really meant to say is that they are not making clear their presumptions, and that when somebody like Daniel Dennett says that why Darwin had the greatest idea in the world, he can explain all of life and mind too, he doesn't tell people that he's assuming there is no God. He's assuming that, well, maybe we don't have the answer for these questions right now, like, how the smallest molecular machine in the cell might have come about. But we assume that, we know, we've got cars and we've got electric lights. So, science must be able to explain everything. So he hides more or less deliberately crucial information from people because he wants them to go to the conclusion that he probably honestly believes. It's not that he's leading somebody to something he doesn't himself think is true, but it warps his ability to evaluate the evidence. And it's especially bad when somebody comes along, like, say, me, and points out that, wait, we haven't explained that there are no, papers in scientific journals explaining how any of this stuff, a number of molecular machines I discussed in Darwin's Black Box, how any of it could have arisen by Darwin's mechanism. And let me tell you, it's, as I said, that book was published in 1996. We're 1 year away from its 30th anniversary, and nobody has still explained any of the examples that I used in Darwin's Black Box, despite enormous progress in science and understanding how life works. Nobody knows how it might have come about, even though many scientists and other folks too, hate the idea of intelligent design and are strongly motivated to show that it's wrong. And many of these folks are quite smart, and yet they still haven't done so. And let me give you a related point, is that science has advanced quite a bit. And one thing that is new compared with back then is that there are now machines that can sequence the DNA, sequence the genome of organisms, the whole schmear, the whole genetic complement of an organism pretty easily. And there are tens of thousands of organisms whose complete genomes have been sequenced. And so it's only now that science can really test whether Darwin's theory can work as advertised or not, because mutations are changes in DNA. And before, just about 20, 30 years ago, nobody could track down those mutations. at least in sufficient detail to see what exactly was going on. People could see that, well, some dogs might be bigger, or we might breed dogs to do this or that or the other thing, and a lot of Darwinists would say, hey, look at that, that's evolution in action, or something akin to it. But people couldn't track down the mutations. Now we can. And in my most recent book, was published in 2019, titled Darwin Devolves, I write about how we have discovered that, yeah, Darwin's theory does work. Mutations do come along, and sometimes they help organisms, but almost invariably, the mutations are changes in DNA that break pre-existing genes. And so Darwin's theory, Darwin's mechanism works mostly by squandering genetic information, squandering pre-existing genetic information for short-term gain. And some people say, how can that happen? How can breaking something help? Here's an example. Suppose that you had really nice car, you had a really sweet ride, but somebody comes along, somebody from the government, say, and says, okay, unless your car gets better gas mileage by tomorrow, we're going to take it away from you. So how could you improve the gas mileage quickly in such a short time? Well, one thing you could do is take the doors off and throw them away, and take the trunk off and throw it away, and the hood of the car off and throw it away, so that it would be lighter, and maybe then it would get better gas mileage. And of course, it doesn't have what it used to, and that doesn't explain where doors or trunks or anything came from in the first place. But if you need right away to get better gas mileage, then that's the way to go. And it turns out that most examples of Darwin's mechanism in action are now known to be things like that, things where genes are degraded, and by degrading the gene, throwing it away, stopping it from working in specific circumstances, that helps an organism that otherwise would perish. So it turns out that, ironically, that Darwin's mechanism works, but it does so by devolution rather than evolution, by degrading stuff rather than building stuff up. Now I forgot where I started, but
Well, no, I mean, that's an excellent, example of, and it also makes me, jump to the thought that, I think that is consistent with what you're getting at, is that it's actually degrading it. It's less sophisticated if you're taking trunks out and you're taking away the hood, but it also is going to make the aerodynamics less efficient. So that might actually slow it down. So in some ways it proves your point. This devolution is actually not necessarily an upgrade. It might actually be harming it.
right.
Well, I made a joke years ago about evolution. And, I really want to kind of get your thoughts on this, because, and this is just a layman trying to figure this out, not understanding something, but I remember thinking to this effect that we were talking about, let's say, camouflage. All right. I would hear things like, after millions of years, this bug evolved this camouflage, so it looks like a leaf, so it could evade its predators. And I said to myself, well, wait a minute. If it took millions of years to evolve this camouflage, what did it do in the meantime? How did he survive all those millions of years without the leaf-looking, wings? And if it survived millions of years without the leaf-looking, it didn't need the leaf because it's already survived. Yeah. So it just seemed counterintuitive to what Darwin. And so then I'm thinking, well, I must be the idiot. They're the smart guys with the double doctorates. So I guess they know some I don't, but it doesn't seem to work. And one thing about Darwin, and I don't know as much about him maybe as you do, but he seemed like he was trying to be a true scientist. Didn't he say something to the effect of, listen, if it can be proven that gradual degrees of mutations don't in fact bring a more sophisticated model that is even more able to survive than before, it'll break down. Now, maybe I'm paraphrasing it and I'm saying it wrong, but he said, my theory will break down. It's as though he was challenging the scientific community. Look, I'm not saying this is right. Maybe I'm off, but, and it seems to me you gave one conclusion. I'm not trying to stay locked on irreducible complexity. Like you said, maybe that's not as a robust argument anymore, maybe, because like you said, more ideas have come up. But what did the scientists who clearly were unhappy with you, I mean, guys like you and Philip Johnson, these guys force scientists to have to come to terms with this concept of neo-Darwinism that they never even questioned. It's a given, lots of holes in this, but it's irrelevant. We've already established this is true. So when you came out with that book, I guarantee you were lambasted. If you go to your Wikipedia, just like with Stephen, it always predicates intelligent design with pseudoscience. It's like, well, wait a minute, where did you come up with? What do you mean pseudoscience? Says who?
That's a label that you put on when you don't have any arguments to show why something is wrong.
Well, exactly. No, you slander, but let's be honest, man. We're Christ followers, so we try to be truth tellers. All right. So you brought up your idea of the mechanism, the flagellum, and all this that is impossible. It's a motor. All right. Well, I guarantee you, your peers came up and said, "Nah, he missed this. That actually it didn't need that because there was a vestigial organ that hung on, didn't really harm it, allowed it to stick around, and suddenly it worked down the road." What was their best argument to try to disprove the idea of irreducible complexity? And did they kind of put a monkey wrench in your theory, or did it not really pan out?
No, what people did try to respond to it, but the arguments were uniformly very weak, question begging, and not, pretty much non-responsive. Nonetheless, since it's generally the case that if somebody publishes anything against intelligent design, some scientist, people will cite it and say, "Look, it's been definitively, disproven," even though it's a dumb argument. But nonetheless, as I said earlier, social pressure is pretty much all Darwinism has going for it.
But this is exactly what I'm getting at is a guy like me who doesn't have doesn't read scientific journals or whatever maybe, and I read your book and I was like, wow, this guy's killed it, man. Look at this amazing thing. And then I read something else. No, this guy over here at Cornell proved that this isn't true. I don't know how to evaluate that. I don't know how to know if the guy actually defeated your argument or not. And so how, again, I'm repeating myself, but how does one go about looking at this and saying, dude, this was not a debunk at all? How do we know how to do that?
Well, you have to read. If somebody comes along and says, that's been debunked, and you don't have a basis for evaluating it, and you ask the fellow, explain to me how this mousetrap was put together gradually, and they say, this guy did it on this website. That's bluster. That's blarney. The guy might, call himself a professor of something or other. But I'm afraid you do have to look into it. If you do this a couple times, if somebody claims that something has been refuted, and you take the trouble to look up, and you maybe read a response from me or somebody else who's been attacked or by a third party, and see, wait, this guy, ignored, pertinent questions, was a real simplistic or talked about something completely different. You say, no, that wasn't refuted. And then you hear somebody do the same thing again, and you look that up and you aren't satisfied with that either, then you've got a basis for taking all of these things with a large grain of salt
Yeah.
until somebody gets in front of you and explains to your satisfaction how this eyeball could have
Yeah.
come around.
Well, and I
So
mean,
yeah,
even like mathematically, there was that calculation about how much time it would have taken, I guess, for things to come out, and it just doesn't work. I mean, it just seems
right,
like it's so obvious. And let's face it, Professor, God isn't easy either. He's not an easy concept either to understand. And there's
sure.
elements as Christ followers, you and I, there's parts of God that doesn't make sense to us, that feel we wish he'd be a little bit more obvious about some of the things that we're trying to understand about him. He's not as simple to grasp as we sometimes wish, but because Christians are trying to honor God, they're trying to honor the scriptures, but science does come in and show elements of God's handiwork and so forth. I'm curious about, just to help those who would watch it, even though people watch that aren't necessarily Christians that watch my show, but a lot of believers do. And so let's see if we can just kind of quickly go over a few of the problems that oftentimes they have. For example, evolution in general. Is evolution, as we describe it, really just basically describing adaptation, that things just adapt over time, but it doesn't go from species to species? Is that the problem that we could scientifically establish? Simply doesn't seem to work. But yes, something will adapt and it will get different changes in body types, but it remains its same species. Is that an accurate description of what we use it when we say evolution? Is it really just adaptation?
Well, it depends on who's using it, but I think that's pretty much what works. I think Darwin's theory does explain a little bit, and it's what you're describing as adaptation. There are some changes that help around the edges of life, and if they help an organism survive, it'll survive. And so you can, if you want to call that evolution, yeah, that's fine. I can agree with that. The problem is when you say, well, that same process that does little things can also make hands and
Yeah,
eyeballs and
yeah.
so on.
So, go
Let
ahead.
me just mention that. Yeah, here's a thought. Suppose that you were on an island with a lot of dogs, big dogs and little dogs and stuff, and the only food in there was hidden in a cave where the entrance was 6 inches high, 6 inches wide, and after 10 years you come back, why, look, only Chihuahuas survived, all the Great Danes. Richard Dawkins would say, look, what more do you want? Evolution in action. But what you did was just get rid of something that was already there.
Right.
And you know, anybody I think would agree that such a thing could happen. But too many people extrapolate this wildly and then say that, well, no, that explains how, dogs came from cats or how birds
Yeah.
came from something else.
And did they even try to explain this diversity of species? I mean, like a whale, I
Yeah.
don't even know which direction it did a mammal jump into the water and eventually lose his legs and become a, or was it the other way around? But I sound stupid when I say that. I sound ignorant, but I don't understand how else this is supposed to work. That a whale or whatever suddenly would go into water and then it would develop the ability
Yeah.
to breathe
No.
in what it doesn't. I don't know. I just don't understand how this was supposed to.
Let me paraphrase the thought process of folks. There are whales. Whales appeared, and before there were not whales. So therefore, something had to have evolved into a whale by Darwin's mechanism, because we know Darwin's theory of evolution is true. You know, that's the
Oh,
thought process.
okay.
You mentioned the camouflaged insect a few minutes ago, and again, the reasoning with things like that is, why, look, here's a camouflaged insect. There was a time when it didn't exist. So look, evolution produced this camouflaged insect over a long period of time. But you haven't shown anything. You've just said, here's a camouflaged insect,
Right.
and you're assuming that this is how it arrived. And that's people don't realize it, but that's pretty much the whole story for almost everything, except for the tiniest changes in organisms, like the chihuahuas on the island. So it's really an astounding,
Well, you seem to be confirming my instinct, but like I said, I don't have a degree in front of my
Mhm.
name. I don't have,
Yeah.
so I feel like I must be missing something. It can't be this easy because the leaps that have to be made they just simply don't make sense to me. And
Yeah.
so I just lean on the fact that, well, I guess I just don't understand the science. But
Yeah.
is there anything, we've ever observed within the biological structure of life that could only have occurred because evolution is true?
Well, I mean, some people have followed populations of bugs and fish and stuff and seen things change. And in the laboratory, these days, you can look at DNA from an organism, say a flask full of bacteria, and they reproduce very quickly and in large numbers. You can actually, we shouldn't say that evolution doesn't happen at all. It's kind of like saying, will a helicopter take you to the moon or not? You say, well, look at that helicopter lifting off the ground. It must be able to get to the moon eventually, but it can't, and it never will, because helicopters need atmosphere to fly in. And in a strained analogy, maybe, but the processes that we see changing the DNA that where people follow are generally ones, as I wrote in that book, Darwin Evolves, that break stuff. They're
Yeah.
going in the wrong direction for something that's supposed to have built up all of the complexity of life.
Now, before I ask you this next question, we're coming up on an hour. I don't want to abuse your time. I don't know if you have any extra time. If you have to go, let me know, and I'll wrap it up. But if you have a few more minutes, I can. I've
Okay,
certainly
yeah, I can go a couple more minutes, sure.
Okay. So let me just, I guess, try to get a few more questions in that would help, I think, Christians, because they battle this thing. I think some of them feel like it's, if evolution were true, it would contradict the Bible. It would somehow diminish scripture as authoritative, or at least inspired. So theistic evolution. Does that make sense to you? Is that a legitimate? I don't know. Evolution by its principle means everything we see happens without without God being necessary. That's its purpose. Is we don't need God for everything to exist. So there does seem to be the sense that to believe in evolution, I mean, I guess you could say God put the machine in order, but it just,
Yeah.
but Darwinism was created to make you an intellectually fulfilled atheist, as Dawkins said. Wasn't that the reason he was creating
Right.
the
And
theory?
Darwin always insisted that if God was involved in any part of it, he would not care at all for his theory. He insisted that this replaces any need for intelligence to direct the unfolding of life. So with theistic evolution, with all of this stuff, it depends on what you mean by this thing. Some people use it one way, some another. If by theistic evolution you mean that God actively guided mutations and stuff so that it would turn out in a way that it otherwise would not, that's okay with me. That shows intelligence directing life. That's okay. But some people use theistic evolution to mean that essentially that um, that there was no need for any particular intelligent activity
Right,
beyond just the general laws of nature
right.
at best, and uh, I'm not a theologian or a philosopher, and I can't evaluate how that stacks up theologically, but it does not explain what has been discovered in life, what science has discovered, the machinery that I'm
Yeah.
talking about. So whether or not it passes muster as a religious concept, it doesn't work as a scientific one.
Okay. So the first time I ever came across, um, I guess this would be intelligent design. And I bring this up because I think I brought up to Stephen Myers too. I stumbled across a guy in the 80s. His name was A.E. Wilder Smith. I don't know if you've ever heard that name. He
Yeah,
was
sure. I have. Yes.
okay, so he seems to have vanished in the discussion, but he was the first person I'd ever seen that began to say there's a code here. There's a code in this thing that nobody is talking about that simply can't exist by random chance. The
Right.
fact that not only is this written in code, which means it has volition, but then again, we as humans have to be able to interpret that code. So, for Darwinism, if Darwin, let me just tell me what you think about this as we get to the end. If Darwinism's premise is everything that we see as the ability to observe nature, that we can draw conclusions because we have cognizance as human beings, that we have ability to deduce and induce and do the scientific method, observe natural laws, see that things work on a regular basis, draw conclusions. In other words, we're unlike any other obvious species on Earth. We can think and create and presume and do things that make us unique, certainly. But if Darwinism's premise is it all can happen without meaning, literally, it just, we got too big for our britches and became self-aware.
Mhm.
And that means that Darwinism has to discover itself. It had to reach a place where it literally was able to have a cognitive insight to say, look, what doesn't matter, us. And they find meaning in that conclusion. It is self-refuting even to believe they should write books about
Right.
meaninglessness because they have to assume that we find that conclusion meaningful. So I'm going to let you kind of conclude with this. Again, sir, I hope I didn't throw you some curveballs because I know this isn't your typical conversation, but I really wanted just to get your insight into, to me, the deeper metaphysical thing of what makes not only your research important, but where I think that just hugely impossible to complete philosophy of Darwinism and atheism is they simply can't
Yeah. They can't
justify
account
their
for
position
Yeah, they can't account for purpose or
or
mind or
anything
anything in
or
a world
any.
where everybody sees purpose and everybody knows they have a mind. And it's really crazy that there are really learned philosophers who say that I don't have a mind. So,
Yes.
why?
Or for Sam Harris to say I'm determined, well then you didn't
Why,
say anything. You just repeated a
why,
recording in your
why
brain.
bother? Yeah, it's really crazy. So you just have to, r- I guess, resign yourself to realizing we live in a crazy world. Like, maybe Christians attending or going by Roman circuses where all sorts of crazy stuff were going on. Yeah, there's a lot of crazy ideas out there, and make sure your kids, realize ahead of time that, you need to be wary of all this stuff. Um, so don't let it upset you too much because when you go away from God, you go into all sorts of craziness. Uh, but I would, I guess, finally recommend that we do need in this age of lots of people with loudspeakers. We do need to learn a bit about important topics for ourselves so that you have the confidence to not be pulled in by just casual, unsupported comments just because somebody says he's a professor somewhere. And most importantly, to be able to bring that message to friends, especially your children or grandchildren, because there's a lot of dangers like that out there.
And for those who are watching, let's say Christian parents who are concerned about their kids, maybe losing their faith because they're looking at, the evolution or whatever, what would you say to them as far as just how to properly evaluate the science that deals with biology and so forth in a way that is consistent with our faith, but doesn't make us look unsophisticated and like rubes that, think we're 6,000 year old, young earth or whatever people might disagree with, just a great way for them to feel comfortable and confident in their faith and not abandon science in the meantime.
Well, again, I'd recommend resources. There's a number of good outfits out there that try to equip parents and general laymen. There's Discovery Institute, of course, that I'm a member of, Steve Meyer's a member of, Reasons to Believe, Hugh Ross's organization, a few others too are, have been involved with this for a while. They have materials that are targeted to folks who are not professional scientists, and they have curricula and or books for advising parents how to explain stuff they kids might have heard in school or their friends or on some TikTok video or something. So yeah, you have to be proactive and you can't let your kids just discover, imbibe whatever the culture is offering. So you have to be proactive, and there are some good organizations out there. So that's what I would advise.
Okay, well, the
folks.
Discovery Institute is wonderful. Like I said, Stephen, and his Return of the God Hypothesis, your books. There's just so many wonderful, resources that Christians should not only not fear sophistication, but in fact should revel in it, because it was kind of our idea. We were the ones that gave the world universities. We were the ones that gave the modern scientific method is all Christian, all European, Middle Ages stuff that changed the world. So, you have not only do you not need to fear it, but you should embrace it, because our people, our lineage are the ones that did that. My last question is just for my subscribers who want to participate in my little ministry. Brad Stein Has Issues, and my comedy and everything that I do. It's just for you guys. So if you subscribe, then you get to get this last question. I just wondered if you could give me one prediction. That's one thing that kind of helps us know that something is scientifically valid, is it makes predictions. And one of the wonderful things that intelligent design did do, because that's one of the things that was the knock against it, is you haven't predicted anything. Oh yeah, how about junk DNA that we proved is actually going to have some value? And sure enough. So what would you say is the most exciting, let's say upcoming, perhaps some new published material or insight or things that are coming up that is a great boon to those of us who are theists, those of us who believe in intelligence? Anything new on the horizon that is just another feather in the cap of those of us who believe that God is in fact involved in creation and continues? Hey guys, I'm interrupting my own interview. If you want the answer that you haven't heard yet, go to bradstein.com and join one of the 3 tiers. It is the militia of the mind, it is the warrior level, or it is the special forces. And then you'll get all kinds of special content and bonus answers to make you smarter than you could ever imagine. Go there now, jump on and join the Mighty 10,000. Well, I appreciate your time. Maybe we can do it again sometime. I hope I wasn't too convoluted, but I was just so curious about the things that at a deeper level. And I got to tell you, like I said, I battle this idea of giving so much, I don't even want to say grace, because that's such a Christ beautiful attribute. But I just feel like it's time to just say, you atheists, you really don't have anything. I'm tired of giving you Christian ideas as a presuppositional foundation for you to talk about life in volition, and it's none of it's yours. So at least acknowledge it. Give it back to the people that gave it to you, and hopefully come to know Jesus, because two of your horsemen have now found out in real time with Christopher Hitchens and Daniel Dennett just how wrong they were. And that's nothing to gloat about. It's a sad thing. But folks, this is Michael Behe. You need to get his books. You need to see what he's up to. You maybe send your kids to Lehigh and let him teach them what, if they want to be my molecular biologists. But again, this is what Christianity should look like. We should be the most sophisticated. We should be the greatest truth tellers. We should be the ones that honor the creator of all things by showing what he has created, observing it, and giving him credit and honor. Remember, folks, if they ever say you're politically incorrect, always say thank you for the compliment. Nothing is more important than speak truth, and that's going to make a lot of people unhappy, but it also proves you're on the right track. And remember, I'm just a comedian. That's why I need guests like this that make me look smart. But I do know this. I have one purpose other than letting you know that God's real and you should know him. All I do is put the woke back to sleep. See you next Monday.